I'm Madison Taylor, 32, and I just inherited a mountain cabin from my uncle I barely knew. It should have been my financial salvation, a property worth $300,000 that could erase my crushing debt. Instead, I drove up to find smoke curling from the chimney and my distant cousin Amber standing in the doorway like she owned the place. Perfect timing, she smiled coldly. We've been expecting you. But this cabin isn't going anywhere, and neither are we. Little did I know this confrontation would spiral into the most unbelievable battle of my life. If you're watching this from somewhere cozy and secure, take a moment to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're viewing from. Trust me, after hearing what happened next, you'll want to make sure your own property is protected. My life in Boston had become a financial tightrope walk. The marketing agency where I'd worked for 6 years had downsized, leaving me scrambling for freelance gigs that barely covered my rent. Each month, I juggled which bills to pay and which to postpone, watching my credit score plummet while my debt climbed. My tiny one-bedroom apartment in Somerville had already seen 2 rent increases in 18 months, pushing it well beyond what I could reasonably afford. Uncle Robert had been more like a distant legend than family. He was my father's older brother who had moved to Colorado decades ago after some family disagreement that predated my birth. Growing up, I'd seen him maybe 3 times, once at my father's funeral when I was 12, once at Christmas when I was 16, and once when he surprisingly showed up at my college graduation. He sent birthday cards with $20 bills until I turned 18, then occasional postcards from his mountain adventures well into my 20s. They eventually stopped, and I assumed he'd forgotten about me entirely. So when a lawyer called informing me that Robert Taylor had passed away and named me in his will, I was genuinely surprised. The news that I'd inherited his cabin in Pine Ridge, Colorado, a property conservatively valued around $300,000, felt like winning the lottery. For the first time in years, I could envision a path out of debt. I could pay off my student loans, clear my credit cards, and maybe even have enough left for a modest down payment on a small condo in a less expensive area. You'll need to go out there to sign some paperwork in person, the lawyer had explained. There's a property manager who's been keeping an eye on things, but the place has been sitting empty for about 6 months since your uncle's passing. The estate has been in probate. I immediately contacted a real estate agent in the area to discuss listing the property as soon as the paperwork was finalized. She was enthusiastic about the market for mountain getaways, especially with remote work becoming more common. Properties like these are going fast, she assured me. My first red flag came when I tried reaching the property manager the lawyer had mentioned. My calls went straight to voicemail, and emails bounced back as undeliverable. That's strange, the lawyer said when I reported this. Mr. Collins has been managing several properties in that area for years. Perhaps he's on vacation. Despite the expense, I booked a flight to Denver for the following week, along with a rental car for the 2-hour drive into the mountains. The trip would eat into what little savings I had left, but the potential payoff made it worthwhile. I packed light, planning to stay only long enough to sign papers and meet with the real estate agent. The drive from Denver to Pine Ridge was breathtaking, winding mountain roads cutting through dense forests, occasionally opening to reveal spectacular valley views. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the journey. Instead, I ran budget calculations in my head, trying to determine how quickly I could list the property and how long I could survive financially until it sold. Pine Ridge itself was charming in that quintessential mountain town way, a main street lined with rustic shops, cafes with punny names like the Daily Grind and Pine for Coffee, and a surprising number of art galleries. I stopped at a local diner to grab lunch and get directions to the cabin, which was apparently about 15 minutes outside of town. Taylor Cabin? The waitress repeated when I asked. Oh, up on Lookout Ridge. Beautiful spot. Take Main all the way through town, right at the old mill, then follow Ridgeline Drive. It's the 3rd property past the trailhead sign. Can't miss it. She paused, giving me a curious look. You family? Yes, I inherited it from my uncle, I replied, noticing how her expression shifted slightly. Oh. Well. Good luck up there, she said with a strange finality, turning quickly to attend to another table. Following her directions, I found Ridgeline Drive and began the climb up an increasingly narrow and rugged road. My rental car, a compact economy choice to save money, struggled on some of the steeper sections. The properties here were widely spaced, each hidden among the trees with just their driveways visible from the road. When I spotted the weathered wooden Taylor sign marking the driveway exactly where the waitress had indicated, my heart did an unexpected flip. This was real. This property, this valuable asset, was now mine. As I turned onto the long gravel driveway winding through the pines, I allowed myself a moment of hope. Maybe this inheritance was the universe finally cutting me a break after years of financial struggle. The cabin came into view as the driveway curved, and it was more impressive than I had imagined. 2 stories of timber and stone, with a wraparound porch and large windows facing what must be an incredible mountain view. It was rustic but substantial, not the small fishing cabin I had pictured. This was a real home, secluded and peaceful in its forest setting. Then I noticed details that didn't align with an empty property: a silver SUV and red pickup truck parked to the side. Colorful children's bikes leaning against the porch railing. A garden recently planted along the sunny side of the house. And most telling, smoke curling from the stone chimney. My momentary elation curdled into confusion. Had the lawyer been wrong? Was there a caretaker living on site? A renter I hadn't been told about? I parked behind the SUV and sat for a moment, gathering my courage while trying to make sense of the situation. As I stepped out of my car, I heard children's laughter from somewhere behind the cabin. Following the sound, I rounded the corner to find a boy and girl playing on a tire swing hanging from a massive pine. They spotted me immediately, falling silent mid-laugh. The girl, around 10 years old, whispered something to the boy who looked slightly older, and they both sprinted toward the back door of the cabin without a word to me. Before I could process this strange welcome, the door opened again, and a woman emerged onto the back deck. She was perhaps in her early 40s, with highlighted blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and the confident posture of someone on their own territory. She surveyed me with undisguised suspicion before recognition dawned on her face. "Madison," she called out, her tone a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite identify. "Madison Taylor? Is that you?" I squinted up at the woman, trying to place her face as she descended the steps from the deck. There was something vaguely familiar about her features, but I couldn't immediately connect her to any specific memory. "Yes, I'm Madison," I confirmed cautiously. "I'm sorry, but do we know each other?" The woman's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Amber Nichols, well, Amber Crawford now. We met at your graduation party, and once before that at your grandmother's funeral, I think. I'm your cousin, second cousin, actually. Your dad and my mom were first cousins." The connection clicked faintly in my mind, a peripheral relative I'd met perhaps twice in my life, so distant she hadn't even registered when I was mentally cataloging family who might have been mentioned in Uncle Robert's will. "Oh, right," I said, though the recognition was tenuous at best. "I'm sorry, Amber, but what are you doing here? At Uncle Robert's cabin?" Before she could answer, a man emerged from the cabin, followed by the 2 children I'd seen earlier and a younger boy who couldn't have been more than 7. The man was tall with a receding hairline and the build of someone who had once been athletic but had softened with age. His expression was guarded as he approached. "This is my husband, Derek," Amber introduced, placing a hand on his arm when he reached her side. "And our kids, Tyler, Emma, and Noah." Each child nodded solemnly at the mention of their name, studying me with undisguised curiosity. "Nice to meet you all," I said automatically, before redirecting to the question that still hung unanswered. "But again, what are you all doing here?" Amber and Derek exchanged a quick glance before she responded with practiced casualness. "Well, we've been staying here since Uncle Robert passed. He would have wanted the place to be used by family instead of sitting empty." "Staying here?" I repeated, looking again at the garden, the children's bikes, the evident signs of permanent residency. "You mean, like, occasionally?" "We've been living here for about 3 months now," Derek interjected, his tone suggesting this was the most natural thing in the world. Amber and Robert were close. He told her many times that his door was always open to family. My mind raced to process this information. But the property has been in probate. And now it's been transferred to me. I'm the legal owner. On paper, maybe, Amber conceded with a dismissive wave of her hand. But Robert and I had an understanding. He told me specifically, the last time we visited him, that we were always welcome to use the cabin if anything happened to him. He knew we'd take good care of it. An understanding? I echoed, struggling to keep my tone even. Was this understanding documented anywhere? Because the lawyer handling his estate never mentioned any agreements about the property. Not everything needs to be written down between family, Derek cut in, crossing his arms defensively. Robert was old school that way. His word was his bond. I took a deep breath, trying to approach this rationally. Look, I'm sure Uncle Robert was hospitable, but the fact is, I've inherited this property. I came here because I'm planning to sell it. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Derek's face hardened, and Amber's polite smile vanished entirely. Sell it? Amber repeated as if I'd suggested burning the cabin to the ground. You can't sell it. We live here now. We sold our house in Denver to start fresh up here. The implications of her statement hit me like a physical blow. You sold your house? But you had no legal right to move in here permanently. This property wasn't yours to claim. Robert wanted us to have it, Amber insisted, her voice rising slightly. He knew you never visited him, barely acknowledged him. We were the ones who checked on him when he got sick. We were the ones who cared. Guilt flashed through me momentarily before being replaced by indignation. I barely knew him because he chose to distance himself from our side of the family long before I was born. And regardless of who visited whom, he legally left this property to me. Derek took a step forward, his posture subtly threatening. Look, we've already established ourselves here. The kids are enrolled in the local school. We've made friends in town. We're not going anywhere. We've had a really rough few years, Amber added, her tone shifting to something more vulnerable. Derek lost his job during the pandemic. We were underwater on our mortgage in Denver. Coming here was our fresh start. The kids are finally happy again. You wouldn't take that away from them, would you? I glanced at the children, who were watching the adult confrontation with wide, worried eyes. The youngest boy, Noah, had tears welling up, while Emma clung to her older brother's hand. It was a perfectly composed tableau of family distress. I sympathize with your situation, I said carefully, but this property represents my financial security. I have debts, a precarious job situation. I need to sell it. We could work something out, Amber suggested quickly. We could pay rent eventually, once we're back on our feet. Eventually isn't going to help me now, I pointed out. And from a legal standpoint, you're essentially squatting on my property. Derek's face flushed red. We are family, not squatters. And good luck trying to evict a family with children in a small town where everyone knows everyone. You think the local sheriff is going to drag kids from their home for some city girl who never even bothered to visit her own uncle? The threat in his words was unmistakable. I took an instinctive step back, suddenly aware of how isolated the cabin was and how outnumbered I felt. I need to go into town and think about this, I said, retreating toward my rental car. We'll talk again once I've had a chance to consult with the lawyer. You do that, Derek called after me, his voice carrying across the yard. But we're not leaving. Try to make us, and you'll regret it. As I drove back down the mountain with shaking hands, Amber's parting words echoed in my head, family should take care of family, Madison. Remember that before you make any rash decisions. The Pine Ridge Inn was the only lodging option in town, a quaint 12-room establishment with floral wallpaper and a communal breakfast room that smelled perpetually of maple syrup and coffee. The elderly owner, Mrs. Winters, seemed surprised when I requested a room with no defined checkout date. Most folks just pass through for a night or two, she remarked as she slid an actual metal key across the reception desk. What brings you to Pine Ridge for an extended stay? Family property matters, I answered vaguely, not ready to share my complicated situation with strangers. I'm Madison Taylor. My Uncle Robert had a place up on Lookout Ridge. Recognition flickered across her face. Oh, Robert's niece. From back east, aren't you? Such a shame about Robert. Good man. Always fixed my porch swing free of charge whenever the hardware came loose. She paused, studying me with newfound interest. I thought his cousin's family was looking after his place now. That's actually part of what I need to sort out, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Do you know if there's a lawyer in town? Someone who specializes in property law? Mrs. Winters directed me to Thomas Barnett, the only attorney in Pine Ridge, whose office sat above the hardware store on Main Street. The following morning, I climbed the narrow staircase to find a surprisingly modern office behind the weathered door labeled Barnett Legal Services. Thomas Barnett himself defied my expectations of a small-town lawyer. In his early 40s and sharply dressed, he had the polished demeanor of someone who could have worked at a prestigious city firm but had chosen mountain living instead. His office walls displayed both his Harvard Law degree and several impressive trophy fish. After explaining my situation, I asked bluntly, do they have any legal right to stay there? Barnett leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. No, they don't. If you inherited the property, you're the legal owner, period. Any verbal agreement your uncle might have made, which is already difficult to prove, wouldn't override a legal will. So I can just tell them to leave? It's not quite that simple, he cautioned. Colorado has specific laws regarding eviction, even for people who are essentially squatting. Since they've established residency by living there for months, receiving mail, enrolling children in school, they're technically tenants now, even without a formal lease. Tenants? I repeated incredulously. They don't pay rent. Doesn't matter under the law. You'll need to follow proper eviction procedures, which starts with serving them formal written notice to vacate. They'll have a certain period to leave voluntarily before you can file for a formal eviction through the courts. How long would all that take? Best case scenario, if they leave after receiving notice, a few weeks. If they fight it and we go to court, 2 to 3 months, possibly longer if they employ delay tactics. I groaned, calculating the cost of extended hotel stays and time away from job hunting. I can't afford to wait months. I need to sell this property as soon as possible. Barnett nodded sympathetically. Unfortunately, you can't sell it with unauthorized occupants unless you find a buyer willing to take on that legal headache, which would significantly impact your selling price. After reviewing my options, I had Barnett prepare a formal notice to vacate, giving the Crawfords 30 days as required by Colorado law. Armed with this document, I drove back up to the cabin the next day, determined to assert my legal rights despite my discomfort with confrontation. What I found at the cabin left me momentarily speechless. In just 2 days, the exterior had been transformed with fresh paint on the trim, a bright blue replacing the original forest green. The front garden now featured decorative stepping stones arranged in a winding path, and a hand-painted mailbox proclaimed the Crawfords in artistic lettering. They were actively erasing Uncle Robert's presence and replacing it with their own. Amber answered my knock, wiping her hands on an apron dusted with flour. Behind her, I glimpsed walls that had been repainted a warm yellow instead of the original beige visible in the lawyer's photos of the property. Madison, she acknowledged coolly. Come to your senses about selling? Wordlessly, I handed her the envelope containing the notice to vacate. She glanced at its contents, her expression hardening. This is how you treat family, she asked, voice trembling with what sounded like practiced indignation. We've put our heart and soul into making this place a home. A home you have no legal right to, I reminded her, struggling to maintain my composure. You have 30 days to find other accommodations. Before she could respond, Emma and Noah appeared in the doorway, eyes wide and questioning. Is she making us leave our home, Mom? Emma asked in a small voice that nevertheless carried perfectly to where I stood. Amber placed a protective arm around her children's shoulders. "She's trying to, sweetheart. But don't worry. We're not going anywhere." The manipulation was transparent, but effective. I felt like a monster under the children's wounded gazes, despite being completely in the right legally. "This isn't personal," I tried to explain, addressing the children directly. "But this house belongs to me now, and I need to sell it." "This is our home," Noah insisted, his 7-year-old face scrunched in distress. "I planted tomatoes and they're just starting to grow. Dad built me a fort in the woods. My friend Jake is coming for a sleepover next weekend." Each detail was a tiny dagger of guilt, precisely aimed. I looked to Amber, who simply raised an eyebrow as if to say, "See what you're doing?" "I'm sorry," I said inadequately, before turning to leave, their accusing gazes burning into my back. In town later that day, I felt those same accusing gazes from locals at the coffee shop, the grocery store, and the post office. Whispers followed me, along with not-so-subtle glares. It became clear that Amber and Derek had been busy sharing their version of events, casting themselves as victims and me as the villainous outsider trying to make a young family homeless. "You're Robert Taylor's niece, aren't you?" the barista asked coldly when I ordered coffee. When I confirmed this, she continued, "Shame you never visited him when he was alive. At least his cousin's family was there for him during his illness." Variations of this interaction repeated throughout town. The narrative had clearly been established. I was the absentee relative swooping in to claim an inheritance I didn't deserve, while the devoted Crawfords, who had supposedly cared for Uncle Robert, were being cruelly displaced. The next morning, I discovered someone had punctured 2 tires on my rental car overnight. The local mechanic could only replace one immediately. The second tire would have to be ordered from Denver, leaving me effectively stranded for at least 2 days. When I reported the vandalism to the local sheriff, his response was tepid at best. "Probably just kids," Sheriff Mills suggested without taking notes or showing any interest in investigating. "Or maybe wildlife. Bears sometimes damage vehicles looking for food." "Bears puncture tires and neat holes?" I asked incredulously. He shrugged. "Stranger things have happened in these mountains. I'd advise you not to jump to conclusions about sabotage. Small towns don't take kindly to outsiders throwing around accusations." As I walked back to the inn from the sheriff's office, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. The handwriting was childish, but the message was chillingly direct: "Leave us alone or worse things will happen. We belong here. You don't." That night, I called my best friend Rachel in Boston, finally breaking down as I explained the increasingly hostile situation. "These people sound unhinged, Mads," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Maybe you should come home and let a lawyer handle everything from a distance." "I can't," I explained through tears of frustration. "I can't afford to pay a lawyer for months of work, and I definitely can't afford to leave the property in limbo while paying for hotels and flights back and forth. I need this sale, Rachel. I'm down to my last $3,000 in savings, with no income since the layoff. If I don't resolve this soon, I'll have nothing to return to except more debt and possible eviction from my own apartment." "Then you need to fight fire with fire," Rachel advised after a thoughtful pause. "These people are manipulating the town against you. Maybe it's time to find out who they really are and what they're hiding, because people who behave like this are always hiding something." As I lay awake that night in my floral wallpapered room at the inn, Rachel's words echoed in my mind. If the Crawfords wanted to play dirty, perhaps it was time I stopped trying to be nice and started investigating exactly who I was dealing with. The Pine Ridge Public Library became my headquarters the following day. Housed in a converted Victorian home, it offered free Wi-Fi and computer access, resources I desperately needed since my laptop remained in Boston and my phone plan limited data usage. The head librarian, a silver-haired woman named Judith, seemed to be the only person in town who didn't regard me with immediate suspicion. "Research on local property laws," she asked when I requested access to one of their 3 ancient desktop computers. "Among other things," I admitted. "I'm trying to understand my rights regarding a family property dispute." Something in my tone must have conveyed my distress, because her professional demeanor softened slightly. "Family matters can be complicated," she offered. "Especially when property is involved. Let me know if you need help navigating our resources." I started with simple searches on Amber and Derek Crawford, expecting minimal results. Instead, I found myself tumbling down a rabbit hole that grew darker with each discovery. Their digital footprint revealed a pattern that sent chills down my spine. Over the past 7 years, the Crawfords had lived at 6 different addresses across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. Their stays typically lasted between 8 months and a year before they abruptly relocated. On a whim, I searched for their names alongside terms like dispute, complaint, and eviction. The results were illuminating. A community forum for a small Wyoming town contained multiple posts from 2019 warning about the Crawfords, who had allegedly moved into a deceased resident's vacation home claiming to be close relatives with verbal permission to stay. When the actual heirs arrived to settle the estate, they found the property occupied and significantly altered. Another hit led to a Montana newspaper article from 2021 that briefly mentioned a property dispute involving a family named Crawford, who had contested the will of an elderly neighbor, claiming she had verbally promised them her lake house in exchange for assistance during her final years. The court had ruled against them. Most telling was a post on a landlord advice forum from someone in Denver describing tenants matching the Crawfords' description who had stopped paying rent while claiming financial hardship, then refused to leave for nearly 8 months while exploiting every legal loophole to delay eviction. "They're professional squatters," I whispered to myself, the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't an isolated incident or a desperate family's one-time mistake, this was their modus operandi. But the most shocking discovery came when I searched for connections between Amber and Uncle Robert. According to a decade-old local newspaper announcement I found in the library's digital archives, Amber had briefly been married to Robert's cousin William from 2010 to 2012 before divorcing and later marrying Derek. She wasn't even a blood relative of Uncle Robert, or me. Armed with new information but needing more concrete evidence, I located phone numbers for the previous victims mentioned in the online posts. From my room at the inn, I made several calls, each conversation more disturbing than the last. "They're incredibly skilled manipulators," explained Martha Winters, the niece of the deceased Wyoming resident whose property the Crawfords had occupied. "They researched my aunt thoroughly before approaching her, learning about her family estrangements and vulnerability. By the time she passed, they had ingratiated themselves with local shopkeepers, neighbors, even her church community. Everyone believed they were her devoted relatives." "What about their children?" I asked, thinking of Emma's tearful face and Noah's tomato plants. "Expert emotional leverage," Martha replied grimly. "When we finally got them out, they had the kids leave behind treasured toys and a half-built treehouse. Made us look like monsters when we finally reclaimed our own property." Another previous victim, James Harker, had even harsher words. "Derek has a history of fraud charges that never quite stick," he revealed. "Amber's the public face, all tears and family loyalty, while he works behind the scenes intimidating anyone who questions them. Check with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation." His record might be sealed now, but there were charges filed in Adams County around 2015. With each call, the Crawford strategy became clearer: identify properties with deceased or absent owners, establish themselves as relatives or caretakers with supposed verbal agreements, and ingratiate themselves with the local community. When legitimate heirs appeared, they would weaponize community goodwill, use their children as emotional shields, and employ intimidation tactics against anyone challenging their claims. My research also revealed their social media presence, carefully curated profiles showing a wholesome family living in various our new home locations over the years. Photos tagged in Montana, Wyoming, and different parts of Colorado showed the same pattern: arrival, declaration of permanent residency, then abrupt changes of location with vague explanations about new opportunities or family needs. Most significantly, I discovered they had specifically targeted Uncle Robert at least 2 years before his death. A Facebook check-in showed them visiting Pine Ridge when Robert would have already been in his late 70s. Comments on these posts included ominous statements like "beautiful property with so much potential," and someday this special place could be a perfect forever home for the right family. They had been planning this for years, identifying Uncle Robert as an ideal mark, elderly, relatively isolated, with few close family connections. They had likely monitored obituary notices, waiting for his death to make their move. But the most damning discovery came when I ventured back to the cabin one afternoon while Derek's truck was absent. Parking down the road and approaching on foot through the woods, I used my phone to photograph the property from a distance, documenting their alterations and establishing evidence of their occupation. As I circled the property, I noticed something through a ground floor window that made my blood run cold. In what appeared to be a small bedroom, visible through parted curtains, I could see stacked boxes and furniture that didn't match the cabin's rustic aesthetic. Moving closer, I recognized several items from the inventory photos the lawyer had sent me: Uncle Robert's antique writing desk, his leather armchair, and what looked like his collection of vintage fishing gear. They weren't just occupying the cabin, they were systematically hiding and likely selling off its valuable contents. Back at the inn, I spent hours comparing my photos with the inventory list and images from the estate. At least a dozen significant items were missing from their original locations, including a collection of vintage watches the lawyer had specifically noted as valuable. I called Thomas Barnett immediately. "They're selling off the contents," I explained, forwarding the comparative photos to his email. "I'm certain they've hidden the valuable items in that back bedroom." Barnett's response was measured. "This changes things," he acknowledged. "Unauthorized occupation is one matter, but theft of estate property is criminal. However, we need to be careful. Your photos were taken from outside the property, which is legally acceptable, but they don't definitively prove theft, just relocation of items within a home they're occupying. So what can we do?" "We need law enforcement involved, but not the local sheriff," Barnett advised. "Given what you've discovered about their pattern of behavior across state lines, this could potentially qualify as interstate fraud, which would fall under FBI jurisdiction. I have a contact at the state police who might be able to help us navigate this. In the meantime, continue documenting everything, but maintain your distance from the property and the Crawfords." The following day, I returned to the cabin with a state police officer Barnett had arranged to accompany me. Officer Danielle Ramirez had driven from Denver specifically for this case after hearing the details. "We've had reports of similar situations," she explained during the drive up. Property fraud targeting the elderly or recently deceased is unfortunately becoming more common, especially in vacation areas with high-value real estate. As we approached the cabin, Derek's truck and Amber's SUV were both visible in the driveway. Officer Ramirez parked directly behind them, effectively blocking them in, and we approached the front door together. The confrontation was about to reach its breaking point. Derek opened the door before we could knock, his expression shifting from annoyance to controlled hostility when he spotted Officer Ramirez's uniform. He positioned himself squarely in the doorway, blocking our view inside. "Can I help you?" he asked with exaggerated politeness, ignoring me completely and focusing on the officer. Officer Ramirez maintained professional composure. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Officer Ramirez with the Colorado State Police. I'm here with Ms. Taylor regarding a property ownership dispute and potential missing items from the estate of Robert Taylor." "There's no dispute," Derek stated flatly. "This is our family home, and everything inside belongs to us. According to county records and the executed will, this property legally belongs to Madison Taylor," Officer Ramirez countered. "We've received information about potentially missing items from the estate inventory that need to be accounted for." Amber appeared behind Derek, instantly assuming an expression of wounded innocence. "We're being harassed in our own home now? And bringing police to intimidate our children? They're terrified." On cue, the three Crawford children emerged from the hallway, Noah clutching a worn teddy bear and Emma appearing to tremble slightly. Tyler, the oldest, maintained a stoic facade but positioned himself protectively near his younger siblings. It was a perfectly orchestrated tableau of family distress. "We're simply here to verify the whereabouts of several valuable items listed in Mr. Robert Taylor's estate inventory," Officer Ramirez explained. "We can do this cooperatively, or I can return with a warrant. Derek's posture shifted subtly toward aggressive. You won't find a judge around here willing to sign a warrant against a family with children based on the claims of someone who never even visited her uncle when he was alive. Actually, this falls under state jurisdiction, not local, Officer Ramirez corrected him. And Ms. Taylor has provided photographic evidence suggesting estate items have been removed or concealed. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Derek's face before he regained his composure. We've simply redecorated. Robert gave us full permission to make this place our own. May I come in to verify the items in question? Officer Ramirez asked, though her tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. After a tense standoff, Derek reluctantly stepped aside. Officer Ramirez entered first, with me following closely behind. The interior had been even more dramatically altered than I'd realized. Walls had been repainted, furniture rearranged or replaced, and family photos of the Crawfords now dominated spaces where Uncle Robert's belongings had once been. Using the estate inventory as a guide, Officer Ramirez methodically asked about specific items. A grandfather clock that had stood in the entry hall, a collection of first-edition Western novels, hand-carved fishing lures in a display case. For each item, Amber or Derek had a ready explanation. The clock had been moved to storage because it frightened Noah at night. The books were being rebound by a specialist in Denver. The fishing gear was put away safely out of respect for Robert's memory. When Officer Ramirez asked to see these items in their new locations, the excuses multiplied. Some spaces were being renovated and too dangerous to enter. Other items were temporarily with friends for safekeeping during their redecorating. We moved through the main living areas with increasing tension until we reached the closed door of the back bedroom I'd photographed through the window. Derek stepped in front of it. That's our children's playroom now, he said firmly. It's private. Sir, I need to verify all rooms in the house, Officer Ramirez insisted. You need a warrant for that specific room, Derek countered. I know my rights. While they argued, I noticed Tyler shooting nervous glances at his parents, then toward the back door. Something in his expression, a mixture of shame and anxiety, struck me as genuine, unlike the performative distress of his younger siblings. Officer Ramirez, recognizing we'd reached an impasse, stepped back. Very well, Mr. Crawford. I'll document that you've refused access to this room. We'll proceed appropriately from here. As we prepared to leave, I noticed empty spaces on walls and shelves where significant items had clearly once stood. In Uncle Robert's office, now converted to what Amber called her home management center, the outline of his prized vintage watch display case was visible on the wall, slightly darker than the surrounding paint. Where are my uncle's watches? I asked directly. The collection was specifically itemized in his will, 12 vintage timepieces valued at over $20,000 collectively. Amber's expression hardened momentarily before she manufactured a concerned frown. Robert gave those watches to Derek before he passed. As thanks for all our help during his illness. All 12 of them? Without documenting such a significant gift? As I've said before, not everything between family needs paperwork, Amber snapped, her carefully maintained facade cracking slightly. Outside, Officer Ramirez spoke to me privately by her vehicle. I can't force access to that room without a warrant, which will take time to obtain. However, what I've seen is consistent with your concerns. The missing items, the convenient explanations, the refusal to grant access to certain areas, these are red flags. So what happens now? I'll file my report and recommend further investigation, possibly involving financial crime specialists. The missing watches alone constitute potential grand theft. But I have to warn you. This process could take weeks, and they know it. As Officer Ramirez prepared to leave, Derek approached us, his expression now openly threatening despite the law enforcement presence. You're making a serious mistake, he informed me quietly. We have friends here. You don't. Consider what that means for your safety if you continue this vendetta against my family. Officer Ramirez immediately stepped between us. Mr. Crawford, I strongly advise against making statements that could be interpreted as threats. He smiled coldly. Just expressing concern for a city girl all alone in unfamiliar mountain country. Accidents happen up here all the time. As Officer Ramirez drove away, promising to check in regularly, I felt utterly alone watching the Crawfords return to the cabin, my cabin, with triumphant glances back at me. That night in my motel room, despair finally overwhelmed me. The legal process would drag on for weeks or months. My savings were rapidly depleting. The local community was aligned against me. And now I faced not just obstruction but potential physical danger if Derek's veiled threats were serious. I lay awake past midnight, contemplating surrender. Maybe I could negotiate some nominal payment from the Crawfords to formally transfer the property. It would be a fraction of the cabin's true value, but it might be enough to address my most pressing debts. I could return to Boston, find whatever job I could, and try to rebuild from there. The sense of defeat was crushing, not just financially but morally. These people had systematically targeted my uncle, invaded a property that was rightfully mine, and were now effectively chasing me away through intimidation and manipulation. If I gave up, they would win, just as they apparently had multiple times before. Sleep eluded me entirely. My appetite had vanished days ago. The physical manifestations of stress, headaches, stomach knots, jumpiness at every sound outside my window, had become constant companions. Yet somewhere in that dark night of despair, watching the digital clock tick past 3 a.m., something shifted inside me. A quiet determination began to form, fueled not by blind optimism but by a simple, unassailable truth: I was right, and they were wrong. This property was legally mine. Their occupation was fraudulent. Their intimidation was criminal. And I was not going to let them win. My first stop the next morning wasn't the lawyer's office or the police station, but the county records department. The clerk seemed surprised by my request to see the complete historical file on the Lookout Ridge property, not just the recent transfer documents. Research, I explained simply. I want to understand the full history of my uncle's cabin. Several hours and dozens of dusty record books later, I had compiled a comprehensive timeline of the property. Uncle Robert had purchased it in 1984, making various improvements over the decades. More importantly, I discovered he had been deeply involved in the Pine Ridge community, serving on the volunteer fire department for 15 years, contributing to the Historical Society, and helping establish a nature preserve on adjacent forest land. Robert Taylor hadn't been the recluse I'd imagined, but a respected local figure who had simply distanced himself from our branch of the family. This revelation both saddened me, I had missed knowing a remarkable man, and provided my first strategic advantage. The Crawfords' narrative relied on portraying Uncle Robert as an isolated figure with only them as concerned relatives. The records told a different story. Armed with this information, I visited the Pine Ridge Historical Society, where an elderly volunteer named Howard lit up at the mention of Robert Taylor. Bobby Taylor. Finest fly fisherman in 3 counties, he declared enthusiastically. Helped me restore this very building back in '96, crafted all the replacement woodwork himself. I'm his niece, Madison, I introduced myself. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know him well, but I'm trying to learn more about his life here. Howard's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Heard there was some kerfuffle about his place. That cousin of his moved in, I gather. That's part of what I'm trying to sort out, I admitted. Do you happen to have any photographs of Uncle Robert or his cabin in your archives? I'd love to see them. Howard proved to be a goldmine of information and materials. Not only did the Historical Society have dozens of photographs documenting Robert's contributions to community projects, but Howard himself had been a frequent visitor to the cabin. Bobby was proud of that place, he recalled, showing me photos of the cabin's interior from various community gatherings Robert had hosted. Kept it immaculate. Each piece had a story, like that grandfather clock in the entryway. Belonged to your great-grandfather, he told me. And those fishing trophies displayed in the den. And that watch collection. Man alive, he loved showing those timepieces to anyone who'd listen to their histories. Each photograph Howard showed me documented the cabin's original state and the items now conspicuously missing. More importantly, they established Uncle Robert's connection to people beyond the Crawfords, people who knew exactly what the cabin had contained. My next step was methodical research through Uncle Robert's personal files, which thankfully the lawyer had preserved. Among tax documents and property records, I discovered a folder labeled simply Collection. Inside were detailed insurance appraisals, purchase receipts, and maintenance records for many of the valuable items now missing from the cabin, including comprehensive documentation of the watch collection with photographs and serial numbers. These documents transformed vague accusations into specifically documented theft. When I presented these findings to Thomas Barnett, his assessment of our position shifted dramatically. "This changes the dynamic entirely," he confirmed. "We now have concrete evidence of specific items belonging to the estate, their values, and photographic proof they were in the home before the Crawfords occupied it. Combined with your documentation of their removal and the Crawfords' refusal to allow inspection of certain areas, we have grounds for immediate legal action." Rather than pursuing a standard eviction, Barnett advised filing for an emergency removal order based on credible allegations of ongoing theft of estate assets. Additionally, he reached out to a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, as the pattern of behavior across multiple states potentially constituted interstate fraud. "The Crawfords are counting on small-town dynamics and the typically slow pace of civil proceedings," Barnett explained. "They don't expect a comprehensive legal counterattack with criminal implications." While the legal machinery began moving, I focused on rebuilding community connections. Starting with Howard from the Historical Society, I methodically reached out to people who had known Uncle Robert, his fellow volunteer firefighters, neighbors, even the barista who had been cold to me previously. "I'm trying to honor my uncle's memory by understanding his life here," I explained to each person. "And I'm concerned about preserving his legacy and possessions." Gradually, my consistent presence and genuine interest in Uncle Robert's life began shifting local perceptions. Howard introduced me to former Fire Chief Galloway, who invited me to the weekly firefighters' breakfast where I heard stories of Uncle Robert's bravery during the 1997 forest fires. The tackle shop owner showed me fishing spots Robert had favored. A local carpenter named Jim recalled helping Robert build the cabin's distinctive wraparound porch. Each conversation yielded not only insights into my uncle's life but often photographic evidence of the cabin's original state and contents, more documentation of what the Crawfords had removed or altered. The watershed moment came when I met Eleanor Phillips, a retired nurse who had cared for Uncle Robert during his final illness. "Those people," she said with uncharacteristic venom when I mentioned the Crawfords. "They showed up out of nowhere 3 weeks before Robert passed, claiming to be close family. I never trusted them. Robert was too weak to question much by then, but he certainly never told them they could have his home." In fact, she paused, considering something. "What is it?" I prompted. "Robert was very clear about his wishes. He mentioned several times that he was leaving his place to his brother's daughter, you, I suppose. Said it was important to reconnect the family branches. I assumed he'd documented this with his lawyer, but I wasn't involved in those arrangements." Eleanor's testimony directly contradicted the Crawfords' claim of a verbal agreement. When I asked if she would be willing to provide a sworn statement, she agreed immediately. "Robert Taylor was a good man who deserved better than having vultures circle him in his final days," she stated firmly. With mounting evidence and growing community support, I established a surveillance system, with the full knowledge and cooperation of local authorities, documenting the Crawfords' activities at the cabin. Within days, we captured footage of Derek loading what appeared to be small antiques into his truck late at night and returning hours later without them. The final piece fell into place when Tyler, the Crawfords' teenage son, approached me outside the library one afternoon. "I know what they're doing is wrong," he confessed, looking over his shoulder nervously. "It's not the first time. They promised this would be the last one, that we'd stay here permanently. But they're already talking about finding another place if this goes sideways." Though clearly torn between family loyalty and increasing moral discomfort, Tyler revealed the location of a storage unit in a neighboring town where many of Uncle Robert's possessions had been relocated, including, critically, the watch collection, which Derek had been systematically selling through online auction sites. With Tyler's information, provided on condition of anonymity to protect him from his parents' retribution, the legal strategy crystallized. Thomas Barnett coordinated with state police and the district attorney's office to prepare concurrent actions, a civil emergency eviction based on documented theft of estate property, and potential criminal charges for theft, fraud, and interstate commerce violations. FBI agent Lisa Morales joined our team, particularly interested in the pattern of similar activities across state lines. "This looks like a sophisticated, ongoing operation," she noted after reviewing our evidence. "The Crawfords have refined their approach over time, specifically targeting properties with complex ownership transitions." As legal preparations entered their final stages, I continued building community relationships. The suspicious glances and cold shoulders gradually transformed into neighborly waves and invitations for coffee. I learned about Uncle Robert's favorite fishing spots, his legendary apple pie recipe, and his quiet generosity funding college scholarships for local students. The cabin was no longer just a valuable asset to be sold, but a legacy with meaning and history, one I became increasingly determined to protect from the Crawfords' exploitation. The night before our planned legal action, I sat on the inn's porch with Mrs. Winters, watching a spectacular mountain sunset Uncle Robert had doubtless enjoyed countless times. "You know," she offered thoughtfully, "when you first arrived, all snippy and city-like about selling Robert's place immediately, I thought perhaps Amber and her family really did deserve it more. But seeing how you've taken the time to learn about Robert, to connect with his friends, to fight for his things rather than just their dollar value, well, I think he'd be mighty pleased with how you've handled things." Her words settled something within me, a resolution of the guilt and uncertainty that had plagued me since this conflict began. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and likely ugliness, but I was standing on solid ground, both legally and morally. I was ready to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect mountain day that makes even serious business seem more manageable. I met Thomas Barnett at his office, where Officer Ramirez, Agent Morales, and 2 additional state police officers were waiting. The paperwork was prepared, the storage unit location confirmed, and our approach carefully choreographed to minimize confrontation. "Remember," Agent Morales cautioned as we prepared to leave, "people like the Crawfords can be unpredictable when cornered. Let law enforcement take the lead, and stay back until the situation is secured." Our small convoy, 3 official vehicles and my rental car, arrived at the cabin just after 9 o'clock. Derek's truck was absent, but Amber's SUV sat in the driveway. As planned, Officer Ramirez and 1 state officer approached the front door while Agent Morales and the other officer circled to cover potential exits. Thomas Barnett and I remained by the vehicles, tense and watchful. Amber answered the door in a bathrobe, her expression shifting rapidly from annoyance to alarm when Officer Ramirez presented the emergency eviction order and warrant to search the premises. "This is harassment," she protested, attempting to close the door, but Officer Ramirez blocked it firmly with her foot. "Ma'am, we have a legally executed warrant. We're authorized to search these premises immediately and to remove unauthorized occupants. Are there any children present in the home right now?" Amber's defiance faltered slightly. "No. They're at a friend's house." "And your husband?" "Out. Running errands." Her eyes darted toward the road, calculating. The search proceeded methodically, with Amber following the officers through each room, objecting continuously but powerless to interfere. The locked back bedroom, which she claimed contained private family possessions, was opened with a warrant-authorized locksmith and revealed exactly what we suspected: dozens of items from Uncle Robert's estate inventory, carefully organized and tagged with what appeared to be online auction lot numbers. Most damning was a notebook documenting sales already completed, including 7 of Uncle Robert's 12 watches, with dates, prices, and buyer information meticulously recorded. The combined value of items already sold exceeded $40,000. While the search continued, a radio call from Agent Morales announced that Derek had been intercepted attempting to access the storage unit in the neighboring town. There, authorities discovered additional items from the estate, including the 5 remaining watches Tyler had told us about. By early afternoon, the legal proceedings were in full motion. The Crawfords were formally evicted from the property, with the children temporarily placed with Derek's sister in Denver pending investigation. Both Derek and Amber faced multiple charges ranging from theft of estate property to interstate commerce violations related to selling stolen goods across state lines. As predicted, several previous victims from other states came forward after hearing about the arrests, potentially compounding the legal consequences for the Crawfords' years of systematic property fraud. Standing in the cabin's living room after the Crawfords had been removed, I felt an overwhelming mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, sadness for the children caught in their parents' schemes, and a strange sense of connection to Uncle Robert as I surveyed the space that had been his home for decades. The recovery and restoration process proved more complex than I had anticipated. Many items had indeed been sold and required legal proceedings to recover. The cabin itself needed significant work to reverse the Crawfords' hasty renovations and repair damage they had caused through neglect or carelessness. Rather than rushing to sell as originally planned, I made a decision that surprised even myself: I would restore the cabin properly before deciding its ultimate fate. Over the following weeks, I extended my stay in Pine Ridge, working with local craftspeople to return the cabin to its original condition. Jim, the carpenter who had built the porch with Uncle Robert, helped repair damaged woodwork. Mrs. Winters connected me with an interior painter who knew the cabin's original color scheme. Howard from the Historical Society provided photographs that guided the restoration of Robert's prized den. As I worked alongside these people who had known and respected my uncle, something unexpected happened. I began to feel a connection not only to Robert but to Pine Ridge itself. The community that had initially viewed me with suspicion embraced me as Robert's legitimate heir, not just of his property but of his place in their town. "You've got his determination," Jim commented one afternoon as we repaired a section of damaged flooring. "Robert never gave up on anything worth fighting for either." With each passing week, my perspective shifted. What had begun as a purely financial consideration, selling the cabin to address my debts, evolved into something more nuanced. I began exploring options that might honor Uncle Robert's legacy while still addressing my practical needs. The solution emerged organically through conversations with locals. Pine Ridge had a shortage of quality short-term accommodations for the growing number of outdoor enthusiasts visiting the area. With some targeted renovations, the cabin could serve as a premium vacation rental during peak seasons, while remaining available for my personal use during quieter periods. I consulted with a financial advisor who confirmed that even renting the property part-time could generate sufficient income to address my most pressing debts while preserving the asset. My marketing background proved unexpectedly valuable as I developed a business plan for Taylor Cabin Retreats. 6 months after my arrival in Pine Ridge, I returned to Boston, not to resume my former life, but to pack up my apartment and tie up loose ends. My former employer had reached out with a flexible remote work opportunity that would allow me to split my time between Boston and Colorado. The cabin's rental income, combined with this part-time work, created a sustainable financial path forward. The transformation in my life extended far beyond financial stability. The confidence and resilience I had developed through standing up to the Crawfords translated into other areas. I found my voice in professional settings where I had previously hesitated to advocate for myself. I established clearer boundaries in relationships where I had often acquiesced to avoid conflict. Perhaps most significantly, I gained a deeper understanding of family legacy that transcended mere inheritance. Through Uncle Robert's friends and neighbors, I connected with a branch of my family history that had been essentially unknown to me. I discovered photographs of my father as a young man visiting the cabin, stories of family gatherings that predated my birth, and glimpses of relationships more complex and nuanced than the simple estrangement I had always assumed. On my last evening before returning to Boston to pack up, I sat on the cabin's porch watching the same magnificent sunset that had captivated Uncle Robert for decades. Howard had stopped by earlier with a final Historical Society donation, a framed photograph of Robert and my father as young men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing proudly before the newly built cabin. "Thought you should have this," Howard had said simply. "Family ought to stay connected, even across generations." Looking at their young faces, so full of life and possibility, I felt a bittersweet connection to both men, the father I had lost too young and the uncle I had never truly known. The cabin represented not just financial security but a tangible link to my family's past and, now, my own future. The legal aftermath of the Crawford case continued to unfold. Derek faced significant prison time due to prior offenses and the interstate nature of their scheme. Amber received a lighter sentence in exchange for cooperation that helped identify other potential victims across multiple states. Most importantly to me, arrangements were made to ensure their children received proper support and care. Tyler, who had courageously provided key evidence despite his family loyalty, received special consideration from the courts. At 17, he was allowed to live with his aunt under supervision rather than entering the foster system. I made a point of meeting with him before leaving Pine Ridge. "I wanted to thank you," I told him during our awkward but necessary conversation at the local diner. "Your honesty made a real difference." He stared at his untouched sandwich. "I should have spoken up sooner. About this place, about the others." "You did the right thing when it mattered," I assured him. "That takes real strength." Looking up, he asked the question that clearly troubled him most. "Do you think people can really change? After doing wrong things for so long?" The question resonated beyond his specific situation, touching on redemption, growth, and second chances, themes that had played out in my own journey as well. "I believe we're all constantly changing," I answered carefully. "The important thing is making sure you're changing in the direction you want to go, even when that's the harder path." Our conversation left me reflecting on the many lessons of the past months. I had arrived in Pine Ridge focused solely on financial survival, viewing the inheritance as nothing more than a dollar figure. I was leaving with a deeper understanding of legacy, community, and my own capacity for courage and reinvention. The cabin that had nearly been lost now represented something profoundly different, not an escape from financial problems, but a bridge between past and future, between different branches of family, between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. As twilight settled over the mountains, I considered how fighting for what was rightfully mine had led to discovering parts of myself and my history I never knew existed. The journey that began with an unexpected inheritance had become a kind of homecoming I could never have anticipated. What challenges have you faced in standing up for yourself and what was rightfully yours? Have you ever discovered unexpected connections to family or places that changed your perspective? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of reclaiming what's yours resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the greatest value in what we inherit isn't measured in dollars, but in the connections and strength we discover along the way. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you courage in facing your own battles, wherever they may be.